Soft White Underbelly, Sadia Khan, part 2. Let's get it.
So I'm sure in your practice you see a lot of women that are, getting into things that look like a sugar baby type
Yes, absolutely.
relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Are there women who marry men knowing full well that they're going to divorce them and take half their money?
That's why they're marrying them. Yeah, that's entirely why they're marrying them. And how you know, these are the signs that she's marrying you for money. Usually she's she's not got her own money. She's got nothing to lose from the marriage. So she will have no money of her own or no career of her own, or she would have been married to a really rich man before and set up a business from that. But there's been a pattern of either no money or relying on men for money. Another thing is she usually comes from a broken home, yet she pushes the idea of marriage. It's really strange. What I notice a lot with these sugar babies, they usually come from a broken home. This is no insult. It's just, what I notice.
Or gold diggers.
Oh, gold diggers, yeah. They usually come from a very broken home without a father figure. And this is why fathers are so important, because the path that leads women down is not a healthy one. But they come from that background. Yet they'll say to their boyfriend, who they've only been with for 6 months, I'm a traditional woman. I want to get married. I want to have kids and I want to get married. So they push this idea of marriage when they never saw it growing up. They've had sex with plenty of men before marriage. They have no idea about how to be a wife or cooking or cleaning or any of those things because they didn't witness that in their home. They didn't.
That I agree with some of these statements, but she's not talking about where this is coming from, right? She's failing to acknowledge that these ideas of marriage were instilled in people way before they even knew what marriage was. And now it seems to be a tool. I wouldn't call it a weapon per se, but it'd be like a tool. Before, marriage was always economic when it came to civilization. Marriage has never been something that you do for love. Marriage has always been financial. Where the property is going if the person dies, who's inheriting what, keeping things in the family, things like that. So marriage has always been a financial institution. And for it to be co-opted by this kind of romantic ideal this isn't an idea that women came up with or that anyone that is looking for financial support came up with. This is definitely something that was taught.
See mum and dad, have dinner together every day and mum being loyal to a man or anything. They didn't see that yet. They push the idea that they want to be married and they want to have kids. They make marriage the focus prematurely. They really push marriage prematurely. So you haven't even known them well enough, but they push the idea of marriage, and you can't even mention the word prenup. It's a forbidden word. If you're in a relationship with a woman and where the word prenup is spoken like you're scared of what she's going to say, she's planning to divorce you. That's it. Whereas a woman who has no plans to divorce you treats a prenup just the way you treat car insurance. You have no plan of getting into a car crash, but you take out insurance because it's a logical thing to do. But when a woman has every intention to divorce you, the prenup is not allowed to be mentioned, and she'll say it like you're being so unromantic because you mentioned it. But the reality is the person who doesn't want the prenup is the person that's planning the divorce. The person that mentions the prenup is just being cautious, just like you would with health insurance. The person who avoids it is the one that's planning it. So they have these kind of signs and symbols, but more so than anything, they don't have traditional values. Outside of the idea of getting married, none of their lifestyle is traditional. Nothing's ever been traditional, ever, in any way, shape or form. But when it comes to marriage, for some reason, they're pushing for it. But it's obvious to a woman, but for men who are, particularly when they are hyper attracted to a woman, they lose focus and they can't see straight.
And they have no other options in their minds.
They have no options. And the other thing, they just don't know what real love even has tasted like.
I think if you're going to get involved with a woman like that, you have to have like 7 options.
You have to. Yeah.
And if one's
but women
misbehaving,
like that don't go for men like that.
I'm
Sugar
sorry?
babies and gold diggers, they don't go for men with options. They want guys that are, have limited options. Yeah, they don't go for men with options. You'll see very few sugar babies that go for men who are at their peak, and very few will go for men that have high self-esteem. Very few will go for men that grew up in a really healthy relationship with their mother. They can sniff out men with very low self-esteem and limited options. And how you can tell a man's got limited options is your beauty is enough to get him invested. There's nothing else to it. You don't even have to talk about a lot. You don't have to invest a lot. And I'm in Dubai where I see this quite regularly. And you'll see they'll go out for dinner and she's not even talking to him. She's on her phone. But he worships her. And she knows that it's purely physical. And because she knows she can manipulate a man physically, she automatically knows this man is probably used to pornography and I'm the best he's ever had, and therefore he's not going anywhere.
I want to hark back to when she was talking about how pay for play is a precursor to men being violent or men having intentions to sexually harm women or getting off on the fact that they're with a woman that doesn't want to have sex with them. And this is that same situation. Sugar babies are those women that aren't interested in having that relationship. They're not interested in the person. They're interested in the access, what that person has access to, what they have access to with that person, and just trying to get on top, I guess, as much as they can. So who's in the wrong there? Who is the violent person? Who's the offender and things like that? I think she was definitely wrong in that take when it came to pay for play.
It seems like marriage is not even an option for a lot of people now.
It's sad, but one thing I'm curious about, I'm Muslim, so I very much advocate for marriage, but it's by the eyes of God. But if I wasn't religious, I wouldn't understand why people want to get married if you cohabit and have kids anyway.
Yeah, everyone's doing that.
Yeah, so but I am curious, what is the reason that women give, or men give, for getting married if they don't have a religious...
I think a lot of it is just the pressure in society that's what we all did. That's what our parents did. That's what...
Okay, it's just the next step to do.
It's what you're supposed to do. And when you're madly in love with somebody, it just seems like the natural next step.
Okay.
I'm super curious as to how the producer of Softwide Underbelly, he's probably in his late 40s, early 50s, or maybe even later. So I understand when he's saying that those are the pressures it's doing things like that. But for millennials and those of us that the realization that the lives that our parents instilled in us or taught us to aim for were not sustainable in this economic arena. And so marriage kind of took a back seat, and a lot of us are having children way later as well. So what is the advantage or what is the pull for young people getting married outside of that's just what you do? And I liken it to those that had debutante balls and things like that. Those that, I guess quinceañeras may be the same thing, but in America, certain communities had debutante balls and kind of like a presentation to the world. And they came from households where maybe the father and the mother were part of sororities back in college, especially Pan-Hellenic when it came to Black Americans, the Divine Nine. And those families, those parents taught their children almost a dance. It's almost like the steps, the choreography to how or what to expect from a marriage, what to expect from dating these certain kind of people, how to get what you want out of these people, or how do you get your person to do X, Y, and Z. And it seems like those are the people that were able to instill marriage as a non-negotiable moving into the future. And many of those people were just looking for other people who had parents that were in similar situations so that they would be on the same kind of footing, right? Like if your parents did this, if your parents were, you know, a Q and a Delta, and my parents were an Alpha and an AK or something like that, like we kind of know how this dance is going to go. We know what to expect, and we know that our parents are going to expect certain things and things like that. So it's almost like a dance where the parents were teaching the children the choreography, and those that engaged or those that knew that choreography saw other people that knew that choreography so that they can perform this dance. But that doesn't bode, that it's not the same thing for those of us that grew up in non-traditional households, those of us that may be first generation American, those of us that just grew up with parents that didn't have any idea about how to instill these values in their children or what to aspire to and things like that.
But what if you've already had the children?
I haven't been in that situation.
Yeah, but I'm just curious.
But now that I'm divorced, it's going to be very interesting to see what my next step would be.
Yeah, I'm just curious what is, if you've already had the children, you already live together, why is marriage the next logical step?
After your video and James Sexton's video,
yeah.
I'm not sure.
This is not to put people off marriage, it's to put people off marrying the wrong person. There's a very big difference. I'm a big advocate for marriage, huge advocate. I'm a Muslim woman. I'm very much promoting marriage. It's good for children.
And so is James.
Yeah. So it's literally, for children, it's essential. But the poor selection process is the only thing you can blame for when you're taken to the cleaners afterwards. That's it. There's no other cause. It's not the woman, it's not this, it's poor selection. And unfortunately, because of the sexualization of what's going on in social media, selection is getting worse and worse for men.
So many people are getting by without any type of romantic relationship in their lives.
But they do suffer. Yeah, they do suffer.
Are romantic relationships that important in our lives?
They're the fundamental ingredient for anyone's mental health. You cannot get through life without social connections. You physically can't do it. We are designed to be attached. And when you take a newborn baby, as soon as they're born, if it doesn't have someone to attach to,
I don't think she's listening to him. He said romantic relationships, didn't he?
Through life without fundamental ingredient.
Any type of romantic relationship in their lives.
He said romantic relationships, yet she is talking about a baby and how social connection is so necessary. I find that really interesting when it comes to some of my female friends, in that the romantic relationships don't seem to be a part of their lives, and they're okay with that. They don't seek casual relationships. They just kind of turn off that romantic side of them and the need for romantic or intimacy, you know what I mean? Like erotic intimacy. And I find that very impressive almost, because as a dude, I don't know if it's because I'm a guy or just I'm not capable of that. But for somebody to be able to say, no, I haven't dated in 4 years, or no, I haven't slept with somebody in 6 years, to me sounds like, whoa, you know what I mean? Like, I guess you don't need that romantic connection with somebody. How enriched is your life without that, right? If you're focusing on work, if you're focusing on religion, if you're focusing on community outreach or community work and affairs and things like that, I commend it all. But what about the person? Like, what is feeding you at the end of the day? And I think that there are a lot of people. I remember living in, was it Rio Dulce, Guatemala. And I had just sailed down there with a couple of friends. And I met another friend. I met up with a friend from Florida down there. And he and I were talking about relationships, as I do with almost all of my friends. And he was telling me how much easier his life is without romantic partnership, because he's even keeled. He would much rather be even keeled and deal with life from kind of like the zero neutral standpoint than have to go through the ebbs and flows and have to go through the waves and the troughs of waves and the troughs, peaks and troughs, whatever that is. We're having to go through the ups and downs. He says that part is so much more stressful, and he didn't see the benefit of having those kinds of relationships. So instead, he stopped dating, and maybe he pays for play, maybe he just masturbates, maybe who knows what he's doing, but he's definitely not hooking up. He's definitely not looking for like casual connections and things like that. And I just understand the pain that comes with it, but if you're not loving, like, what are you doing? If you're not trying to actively get better at having romantic, intimate relationships, especially as we get older, what are you doing with, like, where are you filling that void? Because I think that as you get older, especially, there becomes a glaring need to have those kinds of, relationships. Your friends won't do it. Peers won't do it. Your coworkers won't do it. Family definitely won't do it. And I don't know where the value has gone for that.
But they do suffer.
Are romantic relationships that important in our lives?
They're the fundamental ingredient for anyone's mental health. You cannot get through life without social connections. You physically can't do it. We are designed to be attached. And when you take a newborn baby, if it doesn't have someone to attach to, they essentially would erode. They've got no one to protect them. Now, I've met so many men who have not been in relationships for many years because they've got pornography and they're fine. But your body craves the touch and oxytocin of a human being. It craves interaction. You crave these things because that's how you get feedback into knowing that you are sane. And how I can tell somebody is super, super lonely is they they have very imaginary relationships. They'll be intensely invested into somebody they've met on social media that there's no reciprocity, or they will ruminate thoughts about a conversation that they had 2-3 months ago and it doesn't come out of their brain. So what happens when you don't have human interaction enough, the 1 or 2 human interactions you do have can leave your brain reeling over and over again, because your brain is trying to look for the sources of connection. So if you don't give it to your brain, it will create imaginary ones. And it's almost a form of psychosis.
What should we be asking ourselves before we enter into a romantic relationship?
How am I using this person? And what am I using them for? Most of us go into relationships with something we're using them for. We could either be using them as a numbing cream to get over an ex-partner. We could be using them as a way to feel stable because of, we've got no finances ourselves. We could be using them as an ego boost because I've gotten a bit older as a man. I want a young 27-year-old so I can walk into a room and people can stare at me. How am I using this person? We're all using this person to some extent. Now, if the answer is healthy, it's because I'm using them because they make me feel safe. I can help make them feel safe, and we can provide something for each other that will create a good connection. I'm using them because they make me feel safe, and I hopefully make them feel safe. That's my usage. That's a good usage. Yeah. If we're using people because they make us feel emotionally safe, they make us feel heard, they make us feel seen, and they make us feel loved, if that's your form of using them, that's okay. That's a healthy form of using.
I can't help but think of her answer as a very feminine point, as a very feminine centric point of view, right? Because I think about safety, I think about all of those things. And when a guy is entering in a relationship, I think of Daniel Tosh. He had a comedy special where years ago, and he talks about what his life in a relationship is like. And I think as a man, your life is so different. You really are taking up the mantle of caring for somebody's safety specifically. That's the one that is constantly on my mind. And I always think about how much fun you have dating somebody when you don't care about them as much. How much fun you can still be when you're just dating them casually and saying, hey, you know what? I'll see you when I see you, when you leave my house, when we leave this date. Wherever you go, let me know when you get home. If you don't want to let me know, that's totally up to you. It's not going to be no sweat off my back. But when you're in a committed relationship, you really start thinking about the situations that person is in and risk assessment and figuring out, how to best get this person from point A to point B safely, especially if they have, stuff with them, if they're, might be bogged down with a couple of bags or with groceries or anything like that. You really start thinking about those aspects of them. So when it comes to feeling emotionally safe, I would argue that a guy feels emotionally safe single way more than he feels emotionally safe in a committed relationship. Personally, I think relationships are difficult because you want to become a better version of yourself. I think Esther Perel said something like, you don't really know what improvements you've made in your life until you get into a relationship. So let's say you had a relationship, you're with that person for a couple of years, heartbreak, you did some, nasty things, they did some nasty things, you tolerated things that you shouldn't have, they have as well. And so you guys separate and you do all this healing, you do all this work on yourself, and you're saying, hey, you know what, I want to make sure that I'm never in a situation like that again. I want to heal from this. I want to do the work to make sure that what I present to a relationship is my authentic self. And I want to make sure that person feels seen and heard, and respect is reciprocated. You can do all of this work, but you'll never know how far you've come until you get into another relationship with someone else, until you have that reflection of yourself, especially in those moments where you feel those emotions bubbling up, and you may remember some of the lessons, but you want to act on the emotions or how you're reacting to whatever stimulus they provided for you. And sometimes all of that information goes out of the door. So I think relationships, we really have to, when it comes to men and women specifically, in heterosexual relationships, it is really important for us to understand what relationships are for the other partner, right? A source of love, a source of understanding, a source of someone caring about you, someone thinking about you. These are all fine and well, but there is a level of stress as well that I think men in relationship deal with. And I don't know if it is healthy or unhealthy. I don't know if it's good or bad. It's just something that is. And I would love for us to, like, as a community, talk about that more, especially exploring it in all the different books that I've been reading lately. I'm looking forward to the next book. I'll be saying that on my podcast shortly. But yeah, relationships are very different for partners in a heterosexual union, let's say.
But if I'm using them because there's an unmet need here, or there's an ex that hurt me in that way, or my father didn't do this and you need to now do that, my mother caused this trauma and now you need to do this. If we're using them from that perspective, it's not going to last. The glue is too weak.
I've heard you also say that in marriages we've replaced duty with hedonism.
Yeah, sadly.
Ooh.
I mean, the thing is, like, family members, before, when we were more collectivist, we would have a duty of care to others. We've replaced that with a duty of care to ourselves. We've replaced everything to self-love, self-care, self. We've just replaced everything. Almost everything has self in front of it. I can't think of the last time we've got a concept or a trend that involves duty. And it's an obligation and responsibility. These things are now seen as boring and they're seen as oppressive. So what culture has done is turn duty into a form of oppression, and hedonism and selfishness as a form of liberation.
That I can definitely get behind. Duty does seem very boring. Those, responsibility and things like that, obligation. Those are the parts of relationship that aren't glamorous, and those are the parts that I think you really benefit when you see older people doing it, right? If you grow up with your parents doing it, if you grow up with seeing how a relationship evolves and seeing that 80-90% of relationship is boring, is dutiful, is the day-to-day responsibility, and then you see multiple people, multiple couples when you're growing up, that puts you in a very, very good place. Create your own relationship that has those aspects, those beneficial aspects of it. But if you don't, you just kind of understand that you're kind of winging it. So hedonism, self this, self that, are definitely getting in the way of being dutiful in a relationship, for sure. When you are no longer serving my self-interests, then this relationship has run its course. I don't want to make part two too terribly long. I'm going to cut it here. I think this is a really good place to stop. We are going to continue with this, and hopefully we'll get at least 2 more parts from this interview. Thank you so much for listening, for tuning in, and check out the podcast. If you can't watch it for whatever reason, EFFABL.co. I'll be putting some on my Instagram as well, EFFABL.co. The website is also the name of the Instagram handle, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks for watching.